everything on time, so people can keep trickling in, but we're going to get going to keep you on schedule.
Okay, yeah, I think we're on now. Just wanted to make sure.
All right, good morning, everybody. My name is Lauren Bry, and I serve as the Director of Marketing and Research for Edge Dairy Farmer Cooperative. We provide dairy farmers throughout the Midwest with a strong voice, the voice of milk, in Congress, with customers, and within their communities. A focus of Edge's strategic plan is building strong relationships and focus within the broader dairy community through strengthening and leveraging partnerships. One of our partnerships is with the Animal Agriculture Alliance, a nationwide, industry-united nonprofit working to bridge the communication gap between farm and fork. They promote the true story of agriculture and expose misinformation and other tactics from the activist groups seeking to end animal ag. Edge is proud to partner with them and to sponsor the presentation today. So I'm excited to introduce our presenter, Hannah Thompson-Weeman. As Vice President of Communications, Hannah develops and implements the communication strategy for the Animal Agriculture Alliance. She uses traditional, digital, and social media to help connect consumers and influencers with factual information about modern food production. Hannah monitors and responds to misinformation about food production and reaches out to the media and other stakeholders with accurate, science-based resources about modern animal ag. She holds a BS in Agricultural Communication and an MS in Agricultural and Extension Education from The Ohio State University. Prior to joining
Sorry, Badgers.
Oh, yeah. We still like her. Prior to joining the Alliance, Hannah worked in marketing for Farm Credit Mid-America, and she grew up working with dairy cattle in Frederick County, Maryland, and remains engaged in dairy. So with that, please help me in welcoming Hannah.
Good morning, everyone. Glad to see you all. Thank you for ordering this lovely weather for me. I'm from Maryland. Our office is in Virginia, so I am not used to this. I had to ask Lauren, is this a real storm by Wisconsin standards? Because it seems pretty real to me. And it was a lovely trek over here from the Concourse Hotel. So I've had my fill of winter for the year. Thank you for allowing me to experience that. I'm glad to be here with you this morning inside rather than outside, talking about a very important topic, and that is understanding our consumers. What do they want? What are they concerned about? What are they interested in? Because ultimately, that's who we are here to make products for, to appeal to, and to try to understand. And that's what we're going to talk about this morning. As Lauren mentioned, I'm with the Animal Agriculture Alliance. We are a nonprofit organization, and our mission is to bridge the communication gap between farm and fork. So our objective is to help make sure not only consumers, but also influencers like the media, policymakers, restaurant and retail brands have accurate, balanced information about animal agriculture. There are a lot of myths, there's a lot of misinformation out there, and that's what the Alliance tries to do, is keep an eye on that and inform the industry and figure out how we can respond with a united voice. We are a nonprofit funded by about 300 members, sponsors, and donors, including Edge. And as you can see here, this is not an exhaustive list of everyone involved, but it's a good cross-section of our members that are on our board of directors. We have producers, organizations, companies, and really everyone with a vested interest in the future of animal agriculture. That's who we're looking to bring together, talk about issues, and again, respond on behalf of the industry. You'll see several dairy representatives on here, including DMI having a seat on our board of directors. So bringing us to the topic of this morning, I mentioned we do a lot of monitoring of issues. We want to understand what the media is saying, what consumers are saying, and unfortunately what takes up a lot of our time, what are activist groups saying, and what stories are they trying to tell about our industry to potentially move people in a direction that we probably don't want them to go. We've observed a really exciting trend over the past several years that consumers are increasingly interested in where their food comes from. They want to know more about it. They want to connect with farmers. They want more and more information about their food. That is a wonderful thing. It's a trend we should celebrate, but the challenge comes with the fact that the loudest voices, who are all too eager to try to answer questions and fill in the blank for them, are those activist organizations that have a very distorted view of our industry, a very inaccurate view of our industry, and that's what we're up against, is very well-funded, aggressive, and strategic organizations. I didn't do this today, but I encourage you as a take-home assignment, just hop on Google and just Google, how are dairy cattle treated? First page of results has groups like PETA, ASPCA, Farm Sanctuary, and other organizations. That is the first thing that a consumer would see when they just search a very unloaded question of how are dairy cattle raised. So we need to be thinking about that and how that shapes their perceptions and trying to understand what they're seeing and what they're hearing. So this morning, I'm going to go through pretty quickly 3 different studies from the past year that touch on 3 distinct topics. The first one looks at food labels. The second one looks at, are consumers willing to pay for these special production practices that activist groups claim that they're demanding? And the third one looks at perceptions of no antibiotics ever production systems. The first study was on food labels, consumer perceptions, what's important, what do they want to see on a food label. It was conducted at the beginning of last year by Charleston Orwig, an ag and food focused PR and marketing firm here in Wisconsin. They did 2 separate studies. One was a more general look at food labels, what do people think, and then we worked with them on a follow-up study that was specific to meat and protein and perceptions of certain words that are on labels of those products. They had about 500 respondents in each survey, pretty demographically representative of the country in terms of age and location, and it was a slight skew to female in terms of their respondents. In the general food label survey, 63% of the audience indicated that the information on the label was very important to them when they're making a food purchase decision. So when they're in the grocery store and they're looking, that label is one of the most important things that weighs in their mind when they decide what to buy. As we're thinking, we can probably think of some claims that are on some labels of dairy products that we wouldn't really want to necessarily be their deciding factor in what they're purchasing, but that is something they rely on for information. Now, good news for us, nutrition is still the most important thing they want to see on a label. There are a lot of other things out there on food labels that can be distracting or call for attention, but the number one thing that people are most relying on the label for is nutrition information. You can see on this ranking here that nutrition is what people want to be most easily accessible. Right there at the top is nutrition information. The other top rankings are still more technical information, objective, where is it made, ingredient sourcing, allergen informations, and more kind of soft claims are towards the bottom about company practices and values, company background or story. That's not very important to people when they look at the label. It's that information about allergens, nutrition that they are most looking for, which is a good thing for dairy because we have nutrition on our side and because our allergen information is pretty easy to ascertain. In the specific meat protein study, we looked at several labels. I'm sure a lot of these look familiar to you as labels that we see on meat, milk, and eggs. Terms like free range, cage-free, grass-fed, hormone-free, all the way down to locally raised or natural. The audience was asked which of these labels would increase your intent to purchase a product. You can see at the bottom here, about half of the audience says, none of it, I don't care. So there's a substantial amount of the population that is not influenced by any of these specialty terms. They care about cost, they care about convenience, and that's what drives them to buy products. But there is a significant portion of the population that is influenced from some of these specialty label claims. About 50%. It's worth noting that the 2 claims that were the most popular, that were the most likely to sway purchasing decisions, are natural and local. Those are pretty accessible. Now, we know there's no real definition for natural, but to a consumer, hey, that sounds pretty good. Local, that sounds great. I might be more likely to buy that, versus some of these other terms that they might not know what that actually means. It's also interesting to note that of the population that did care about these terms, about half of them cared about 3 or more. So you're going to hear this a lot. There is a segment of the population that really cares about all of these specialty terms, and they want to pay for it. Now, that's a small percentage of our population. Despite what we hear about the trendiness of all of these specialty food products, it still is a smaller portion of our population that wants to buy them. As you can see here, the majority are not interested, and of those that are interested, it's really terms more like local or natural that resonate with them. But there is somebody that wants to see all of those claims on something that they're going to purchase, and that would make them more likely to purchase it regardless of the price point. Look specifically at no antibiotics ever. How does that influence your decision to purchase? As you can see here, kind of similar, you've got almost half of the group that says, nope, I don't care. A no antibiotics ever label does not make me more likely to buy something. All the way up to about 17% that says that has a high impact on whether I want to buy something. A no antibiotics label highly influences my decision to buy something. Take add all those three bars together, that's about half the population that a no antibiotics label has a moderate to high impact on their purchasing decision. So again, that's about half of our audience that cares to some level about a label on their product about antibiotic use. It's very relevant to us as we think about what they're looking at when they go to the grocery store. Another label, humanely raised or animal welfare certified programs. Note here, there is again that 39%, that's lower than other categories. So of all the categories, this seems to be the one that more people are influenced by, but there is still about 39% that's not influenced by those claims. And I apologize here, I don't know what happened to my slides. There's some scrambles, but I don't think it's influenced anything you need to read so far. And then there's about 18% that an animal welfare or humane handling certification highly influences what they're going to buy. The other interesting thing here is there's a high correlation between people that care about the antibiotic-free or no antibiotics label and people that care about humane certification. So of people that care about those, there's about an 80% overlap. So again, there is a segment of our population that really values these. It's not a majority, but there is a segment that wants to see those labels, and that motivates their purchasing decisions. We also asked about lab-grown meat. This is something we are hearing a lot about, these cell-cultured meats that in some of these companies, their goal is to replace real meat with these kind of substitutes. So we were really curious to hear what these consumers thought of them. Over half of our audience says, nope, absolutely not, I will not try that. The other side of the spectrum, about 3% says, yep, I'll eat it today, no hesitation. Falling somewhere in between were maybes or I've never heard of lab-grown meat. But at least of the audience we asked, a lot of them were not interested in trying. It's actually worth noting, you might think that the Midwest would be lower than the general population in terms of willingness to try, but they were actually higher. About double the rate in the Midwest had no reservations, I'll try it, serve it up today. So make of that what you will. When they were asked why they had hesitations about trying lab-grown meat, the top couple categories here all reflect some kind of hesitance of it being a new technology. It's not natural, I don't understand it, I don't know if it's safe, I don't know how it's made. Really interesting, this middle one here says lab-grown meats hurt farmers. So there was actually about 36% of this population that recognized that these lab-grown substitutes might impact farmers' ability to do business, which is really interesting. Probably not something that we would have thought they would come up with on their own. And then down here you've got the percentage of the folks that say, I will try it. About 50% of the people who said they would try lab-grown meat with no hesitation also said that none of the other issues we asked about in the survey that would impact their purchasing decisions. So that's the segment of the population that says, I don't care, food is food, it feeds me, if you give it to me, it's safe, I'm good to go. So again, there's that extreme in the population as well. That's not really interested in any additional information about their food. They trust that it's safe and they're going to buy it no matter how it's produced. Wanted to touch on this quickly. We asked the audience about their thoughts on the role of the school system in providing food. Because as we know, everything from elementary, middle, high schools, colleges is an institution providing food, and it really can shape people's perspectives on what they're being offered to eat. The most popular response about the school's role in dining decisions, over half, said their role is to provide a variety of plant and animal proteins, which is a pretty reasonable stance. I think we would all probably agree with that. But then down here, you've got 13.7% that think the role of the school is to switch people to plant-based diets. Now make note, there's only 5% of people in the US that are vegetarian or vegan. So 3 times that think it's the role of the school to move people in that direction. That's either do as I say, not as I do, or a kind of a difference in definition of plant-based. I think when we all hear plant-based, we think no animal products, or vegetarian, no meat products. But for some people, plant-based just means a diet that has a lot of plants in it, which is probably a healthy diet that we all subscribe to. So it's kind of an interesting discrepancy around some of this terminology. That's all for the food label survey. Moving on to the next one to touch on, it kind of plays into that. We've talked about food labels. What do people care about? What motivates them? But the second question is always, okay, whatever, you want all these specialty products, I'll produce them for you, but are you going to pay the difference? Because a lot of these specialty production systems, whether it's no antibiotics ever, or a certain certification program or housing system, they are less efficient. They do lead to increased cost for the producer, and somebody has to pay for that. Whether it's the end consumer or the person in between, someone has to bear that cost. So this study we were involved in funding tried to answer that question. It is looking at poultry, so cage-free eggs and slow-growing broilers in particular. So you might be thinking, well, I don't care about chickens. Why would this be relevant to me? But hopefully we can illustrate why that is, because they are not the only industries that there are calls for different production methods to be put in place. And these are just a case study for the rest of us to understand what might happen and to hopefully try to head off similar trends in our industries. So the goal of this study was to try to figure out 3 things. The first one was, what do consumers actually know about cage-free eggs and slow-growing broilers? Do they actually care? Are they the ones who actually wanted to see these changes put in place? And do they understand trade-offs for those production systems? The second one, are they willing to pay for those specialty attributes, and how much are they willing to pay? And then lastly, how does more information and different types of information influence their perspectives? So first, kind of a level set of the egg industry as we look at the egg study. Cage-free eggs are more expensive to produce than conventional for several different reasons. It's a different housing system, you need more space, there are some mortality and disease challenges you have there, different employee systems you have to put in place, and it's just a more costly system. Right now we're looking at about $1 difference between conventional and cage-free eggs if nothing else is different, but there is a cost difference between those two. It changes based on the markets and different things, but it's about $1 difference for a dozen of conventional or cage-free eggs. Now, why are we even talking about cage-free eggs? Back in 2015, a group of very well-funded, very aggressive, and strategic animal rights activist groups decided that they wanted to move towards a cage-free future. So they all came together and decided this was their issue, this is what they were going to work on, and they wanted to move the industry towards cage-free production. They very aggressively targeted restaurant, retail, food service, hospitality brands with these elaborate pressure campaigns to move them in that direction, saying, oh, your customers want this. If you don't agree, we're going to put billboards in Times Square. We're going to take out ads. We're going to go to your social media pages. And they did all these things. And they ended up convincing about 300 brands to say they were only going to source cage-free eggs by a certain deadline, 2024, 2028, different deadlines for different companies. Now that percentage of the population, or percentage of the industry that said they want to go cage-free represents 75% of our egg production. That's the big green that we're going to need. Now today we're only about 18%. That's the little blue down here at the bottom. And egg producers have already converted at an over 200% rate for the past 2 years to move in this cage-free direction. They're going to have to double that pace to have any hope of meeting the demand. Of course, from our perspective, that's the whole objective of the activist groups, is an unsustainable, unattainable system that's going to force producers to go out of business rather than try to make these conversions. So to look at this study, we tried to look at, again, the question of, will consumers pay the cost difference in order to make this transition doable? Because a lot of producers are saying, well, I can't afford to make this transition if people aren't going to pay for it. So we had a study with 200 respondents, sample demographics similar to the US population. And there were 4 different treatments. The control group were just asked the questions and not provided any additional information. There were 2 groups that were provided information from the egg industry, one in video format, one in graphic format, and 1 group that was provided information from an activist group, the Humane Society of the United States. These are just some examples to give you some perspective of how the questions were asked, because you see a lot of times when you ask a consumer, well, what do you buy or what do you value? What they say doesn't really align with what they actually buy at the grocery store. So the idea here was to give them choices and different versions until we finally figured out what exactly was motivating them. So as you can see at the top, these are the 2 most stark differences. Plain eggs, $1 a dozen, versus the other option with all the fun stuff, all the extra labels, for about $5 a dozen. And then you can see at the bottom how these labels were switched, costs were changed, to try to figure out again what exactly was motivating them. In addition to the specific questions about the labels, they were also just asked some questions about their general egg consumption. The one thing I want to highlight here is that only 38% feel that egg-laying hens are treated well. So the majority either have no idea, they're neutral, or they think hens are treated poorly. So I certainly think that's a trend we would probably see across all species, is people either don't know, or because of things they've heard, they assume that animals are not treated well, which is a big challenge for us. Looking here at the choice test, this tells you how much of a premium people are willing to pay for these different labels. So the bigger the green bar, the more price difference. As you can see at the top, non-GMO. That is what people are willing to pay the most premium for, almost 50 cents a dozen eggs. That's obviously very relevant to you all because we see some processors moving in that non-GMO direction, wanting to put that on the label. Well, it really could, again, according to what they say, motivate some consumers to pay more. Organic, another popular one, the second most that they're willing to pay for. Cage-free is pretty far down. It's about 30 cents where it breaks out. Now remember, the cost difference is $1. So if they're only willing to pay 30 cents more, that's a problem. These look at what led to the biggest change in market share. So what motivated people to change their purchasing decision the most? Number 1 answer, a reduction in price. So that still motivates people the most, regardless of what information they received. You can see the different information treatments at the top. Making things cheaper was what made them say, yes, I will buy that. That non-GMO label, second most popular. That is what will change their motivation to buy eggs, was having a non-GMO label on there. The cage-free label is pretty far down. And the other interesting thing to note here is what difference information made. So these 2 in the middle are the groups that were provided the industry information. The graphic didn't really seem to matter, but the video made a difference. So that should be something we think about in how we communicate about our industry. Maybe videos are something we should be moving more towards because they can be more effective. And the activist graphic made groups more likely to move towards the cage-free label. So their messaging was effective in that area. This chart shows the demand versus price. So as you would predict, the demand goes down as price goes up. That's this white line showing. So again, there's a percentage of the population, a small percent, that says eggs could be $1 more. If they're cage-free, I'll pay it. But most people do not agree. Most people say if eggs get more expensive versus a certain point, I'm just not going to buy eggs, which is a big concern for us. And again, what we would contend was the activist objective. They know that people have a food budget, they're watching it, they want things to get too expensive for people to be able to purchase. And that's what this chart shows. Over here, if conventional and cage-free are both available, yes, there's part of the population that will buy cage-free even if they're more expensive, but the vast majority will buy conventional. That second scenario, if only cage-free are available and they're at a certain price point, almost 20% of people will just stop buying eggs. So that's our concern, and that's really the take-home message, is it's about choice. There are certain populations that want certain things, they value them, they'll pay extra for them. That's great. There are producers that will gladly produce that for a premium. But there's also a segment that wants low-cost, affordable protein, and that's who we need to make sure we're not taking choices away from them. The other study here looked at slow-growing broilers. So broiler chickens raised for meat, activists have decided they grow too quickly, and they want brands to move in a direction of slow-growing breeds. It equals about an extra 2 weeks on the farm. So that's 2 weeks more of feed, 2 weeks more of waste, 2 weeks more of electricity. That's going to be a shortage of prime breast meat and cause a lot of challenges for the industry. And luckily, so far, this hasn't caught fire as much as the cage-free issue. I think because a lot of restaurants and retailers have learned from the cage-free pledge that that's not exactly working out. Similar survey, 2,000 customers, 2,000 consumers across the country, demographics to the US population. In this study, again, we gave them different bits of information. One group received no additional information. One group was shown a couple articles that we would consider to be pro slow growth chicken. And another group was shown information from the National Chicken Council, which we would say was more pro conventional chicken and maybe showing some of the trade-offs of slow growing. These are some examples of the stories they were shown in NPR and New York Times. They have some quotes from activist groups, some very negative messaging about conventional poultry production. And these are some of the graphics from the National Chicken Council, so showing the impact of slow growth chicken, why it would be a problem, why there'd be sustainability considerations, and providing that type of information. I also wanted to highlight here, same thing, 28.5% strongly or somewhat agree that meat-producing chickens are well treated. So that's about 70% that either are neutral or disagree with that statement. So just a general sentiment that people are either neutral or even disagree with the idea that farm animals are treated well. And remember that, we'll circle back to that a little bit later. These are their choices of what they were willing to pay for. White is organic, blue is slow growth. And you can see here, again, there's that part of the population that says, yeah, slow growth sounds good. I'd pay up to $1 a pound for it. Nobody was willing to pay that extra premium they were willing to pay for organic. But you can see almost 30% was down here. I don't know what slow growth is. I don't know if it's worth it. I'm not willing to pay anything more or maybe up to 20 cents more of a premium. In this one, information was very influential because this audience knew less about slow-growing chicken than they did about cage-free broilers, because we haven't heard as much about it, it hasn't been in the media as much, so the opportunity to provide them information was much more influential in this case than it was before. So as you can see here, before, nobody was willing to pay more than $1. The group that read the supportive of slow-growth chicken information, now over 40%. Was willing to pay over $1. This group in red that got the information from National Chicken Council, 100% of them moved into that less than 40 cents category. They were willing to pay a premium. So this tells us that information does help. Going to people and giving them resources about these issues does influence their perception and what they're willing to shop with their dollar. This graphic shows a similar thing we look to with eggs across all three treatments. As the price goes up, people's willingness to pay goes down. So again, there is a percentage of the population that says, add the label, no matter what the label is, I want to pay more for it. But there's a lot of people that aren't willing to do that and are very price sensitive. So this is what I said we were going to circle back to. Remember that only 30% of people said that chickens were raised well. But clearly, they know absolutely nothing about chickens are actually raised. We can see up here, what percent of meat-producing chickens in the US are cage-free? Don't read the slide. Anybody here know the answer? It's almost all of them. Almost all broiler chickens. They don't really use cages at all. Fewer than 3% of respondents answered that question correctly. What percent of meat-producing chickens in the US are not fed added growth hormones? Anyone know the answer? 0, none, it's illegal. 12% answered that correctly. How long does a typical meat-producing chicken live? Most people said 12 weeks. It's actually about 6 weeks. So this shows that people feel like they're not being raised well, but they know absolutely nothing about how they're actually being raised. I know that's not new information to you, that there's a communication gap, there's a gap, but it just illustrates it. They don't know anything about the production systems, but they have a bad feeling about them because of things that they've heard or read or been told. So what does this all boil down to? Price is a significant driver for most consumers. So price is still a king when it comes to people deciding what they're going to buy. There is room for growth in the cage-free market, but it will probably never have a majority of the market share because most people are not going to be willing to pay that premium. And again, think about what that means. If it's not a majority of the market share and all these grocery stores have said that's all they're going to sell, what does that mean for our egg producers and how they're going to sell their product? And again, a small fraction, less than 30%, are willing to pay a lot for cage-free, but a much larger percentage are not willing to pay much at all. So we have to think about how we serve all of our consumers. Slow growth broilers, some similar conclusions. Price is a significant driver for most people. People don't know anything about chicken production in general and much less about slow growth in particular. And what was really interesting is I think about 15% rated themselves a 5 out of 5 in terms of their knowledge about slow growth broilers. Most people in the poultry industry would not rate themselves a 5 out of 5 in terms of their knowledge about slow growth broilers. The other thing that was interesting is there's no label for slow growth broilers that exists. So Dr. Lusk made up a label for the terms of this study, and some people said, yes, I always buy that label. It's physically impossible that that is the case. So they don't always do as they say, as we can tell. Choices about what they're going to buy for slow growth are very sensitive for information, so this is definitely an opportunity for us to engage. And some consumers even thought slow growth was a bad thing. So even after being given the information, they said, well, slow, I don't want to eat a chicken that's slow. I want the regular chicken or the advanced speed chicken. So maybe some of these terms that activist groups are trying to use are actually playing against them, and it's an opportunity for us to talk about what we are doing. So the take-home messages for dairy, activists will call, they already are calling for these specialty production practices in dairy. Cow-calf separation, dehorning, pain management, individual housing for calves. These are all things that we're hearing about. I know dairy has the farm program, so it's a little bit different in your susceptibility to these things being adopted, but they will go, they already are going to restaurant and retail brands and putting pressure on for changes in dairy. So this is something that could definitely happen to your industry, so we should be thinking about how do we respond, how do we use this research to pump the brakes on making policies that consumers probably don't actually want. The interest in non-GMO labels, that's applicable across all species. So that being one of the categories that people seem to care about and at least say they're willing to pay more for is definitely relevant to all of you. Companies should not commit to pledges that will raise food costs unless they actually know that their consumer, and not a small percentage of activists who don't actually drink milk or eat meat, are saying. So we need to think about who our customer is, and the fact that stores like Family Dollar have gone cage-free doesn't really make a lot of sense when they think about who their core customer is, and we have to be mindful of that. And then lastly, information does change minds and does have an influence. So we need to amp up our sharing, amp up our engagement so that we're going to people first. The last study I want to touch on quickly is a little bit different. This study looked at perceptions within the industry, so veterinarians and producers who had experience with no antibiotics ever production systems. What are their perceptions? What do they think about the impacts on health and welfare? And then what do they think their customers, so restaurant and retail brands, think? This was a survey conducted of about 560 veterinarians and producers all across segments of animal agriculture. So when asked what factors contributed to their decision to raise animals, either raised without antibiotics or conventionally, of the group that was raising animals without antibiotics, almost all of them said it was because of market demand. You can see the other options here to decrease antibiotic resistance. It's the right thing for the animals. That's not why. Their belief is that we are only doing this because of marketing, because it's a buzzword that restaurant and retail brands think will sell to consumers. So that's a big kind of takeaway, that the people who are experts in this, veterinarians, don't actually think it's better, and as we'll see, it might even be worse for animal health and welfare. Of the respondents who are using conventional production, so using antibiotics in their raising of animals, Right across every category, they say they're going conventional because they're concerned about negative impacts to animal welfare from going NAE. And then also a significant percentage says we are already responsibly using antibiotics. We do not see a need to eliminate them at potential trade-offs for animal welfare because we are using them responsibly. This chart, they were asked, what do you believe about the impact on animal health and welfare of removing antibiotics? So going raised without antibiotics or no antibiotics ever. These big red and slightly also red columns are significantly and slightly worsened. So across all categories, and the two breakdowns here, in every category there were both respondents who were going conventional production or going raised without antibiotics. So across all categories, there was vast agreement that going no antibiotics ever is significantly or slightly worse for animal health and welfare. It's not a benefit to the animals. Contrast that with, and half my chart is missing, but contrast that when asked about consumer beliefs or customer beliefs. So what do these veterinarians and producers think that restaurant and retail brands think? It's the exact opposite. All of these blue are slightly or significantly improved. So the folks out there on the ground raising animals or treating animals believe that what they are being asked to do from restaurant and retail brands is based on a misunderstanding of how this impacts animal health and welfare. So we actually had a lunch and learn back in December where we had Dr. Randy Singer, who did this research, present it to several restaurant and retail brands. So we're really interested to see what comes of that. There were a lot of great questions from that group that hopefully they'll keep in mind as they make further policies regarding antibiotic use for their supply chains. So the key findings of that study, again, a majority of veterinarians and producers across all animal commodities feel that raised without antibiotics production leads to decreased efficiency and worse animal health and welfare. This one is also very troubling. Respondents indicated that there are times that maintaining the raised without antibiotics label is prioritized over animal health and welfare. So there are times that they feel pressure to not give an antibiotic when they feel like they should because they want to stay in that no antibiotics ever production stream. So that should be hugely problematic for all of us because that's not a very good show of our commitment to animal welfare, and that's a very tough position for a producer and a veterinarian to be put in. So that was a very interesting takeaway for us. Respondents indicated, again, as we talked about, that raised without antibiotics would significantly to slightly worsen animal health and welfare, but they feel like the restaurant and retail brands that are asking for these systems feel the opposite, and they think it's a good thing for animal welfare. So what does all of this mean for you? I boiled this down to 2 action items. I know you all have more than enough to do. You don't want any to-do lists from me, but just 2 things that I think we should all be doing. The first is seeking to understand our customers. We need to listen to understand, not just to respond. I think that's a Stephen Covey quote. So we need to make sure we are actually making a good faith attempt to understand people. What motivates them? What are their values? What are their fears? What drives them when they go to the grocery store? Sometimes we think we know because we know a lot about our industry, but we might be completely wrong in trying to communicate with them in a way that's not going to resonate with them because we're not actually appealing to what's driving them. So more and more of these research studies of different things, any way we can invest in trying to understand our consumer is really important. Secondly, is that proactively sharing information. Part of the tale of the slow-growing chicken up here is that we need to get to them first with information about what we're doing. If we wait till they've already seen the negative information, they think they know it all, we're not going to have the opportunity to influence them. So now is the time for us to be proactive before there's an issue, when there's not a video we're responding to or some kind of negative claim we're responding to, is the time to be doing videos, farm tours, infographics, any way we can of sharing information about what we do. The last thing I want to touch on is just let you know about some of the resources we have available at the Alliance, whether you're a member or not. Everything I'm touching on here is publicly available. We have several positive resources on key issues. We just came out with a new sustainability impact report that looks at all of the different facets of animal agriculture and our commitment to continuous improvement in key areas like environmental sustainability, animal welfare, antibiotic use, food safety. Anyone can go in, you can view it, you can download it off of our website. It's a great piece for people who need that high-level intro to animal agriculture, what all we have going on, media, legislators, those type of folks. It's a really great piece to share with them. On the meat side, we have a whole collection of Meat Matters materials. It's kind of our response to Meatless Mondays to talk about why meat has a role to play in a healthy, balanced diet. We have infographics, social media content, white papers, and other things that go along with that. We're also very involved in engaging with the media, both mainstream and trade media. We do a lot of blogs, give a lot of statements, interviews to provide the perspective of the industry. So if there's ever an issue that you are asked about that you feel isn't relevant to you specifically, it's more of a general industry issue, or you're just not comfortable handling that, obviously work with your state associations, but we're also here to help as well any way that we can to make sure we have that positive, accurate story out there. We do a lot of outreach on social media, every different channel. We have a lot of infographics. All of our social media content that we post is available for anyone to download out of our resource library. Again, you don't have to be a member. On our website, under the Engage section, under the resource library, you can see all of these graphics. We have ones for all different species, all different topics. So if you have a farm and you're thinking about doing more social media outreach, but again, you don't have any more hours in the day to sit around making graphics, we have lots of them that you can pull and use for your own purposes. We also do a lot of monitoring of issues, media coverage, legislation, activist activity. So on our website, you can check these out, see what's going on in different states, see what's happening nationwide that could impact you and your operation. We'd love for you to stay in touch. You can find us, again, a lot of places online. We have a public newsletter that's available even if you're not a member. And we have time now. I would love to answer questions you guys have. My watch is buzzing, so it's telling me to stop talking. Let me bring it on microphone.
Yeah, hi. So you guys are totally our allies and are like on the front lines of the whole debate. But farmers, we really care about farmer sustainability, as in how many farmers are left of us. So how are you guys looking at the mark of promoting animal agriculture, but a lot of these cage-free, organic, value-added, everything else, it provides a lot more opportunities for a lot more farmers. So how can you kind of ride that fence of promoting animal ag, but yet fostering all these opportunities for all these guys that maybe there'll be 20 more people that will raise cage-free chickens versus 3, that kind of thing. That's
a great point. Our perspective is that a rising tide lifts all boats. We do not take any position on any certain production system. Our viewpoint is, again, there's room for all of us on the plate. There are a lot of different consumers out there that value different things. Some want the specialty products, local, organic, cage-free, whatever that might be, and we need to provide that product to them. And there are others that want the cheapest, most efficient option that a conventional producer can provide to them. So we're always sharing that message that we support animal agriculture as a whole. We're not condemning any production system. We're not endorsing any production system over another. There's room for all of us, and that's why our concern is with the elimination of choice. So there's absolutely no issue with cage-free eggs being available, and if more people wanted them, that's where the market would go. People would buy them, grocery stores would stock more, and producers would naturally shift, versus these kind of things that are forced upon producers and consumers by taking choices away. So our viewpoint is always more choice is better than less, and there's room for all of us.
Do you see in the future any change in labels or label fatigue, meaning all these claims and everything, and they start throwing them on everything and people just start tuning out? And if that happens, do you see them going back to just ingredients?
That's an interesting question, and something that I thought was interesting in the research was that, again, 50% of people, and the vast majority, valued nutrition more than anything else. And probably nutrition is what companies spend the least time thinking about that's on their label, that's slapped on there, and then they think about all the other marketing things. So I certainly think people are starting to get maybe a little more cynical about some of these labels and what they actually mean. We're starting to see a more critical eye being turned to claims. We're starting to hear people pointing out the absurdity of gluten-free grapes and things like that in terms of labeling. Non-GMO cat litter, things like that are starting to become a punchline. So I do think to some extent people are starting to be a little bit more savvy and start to question the marketing behind some of these things, and hopefully that will lead to an approach that's more focused on selling the benefits of your product versus adding absence claims that don't actually mean anything.
What do we do when we start getting into the discussion about how animals are raised, but when someone starts asking the questions about how they're harvested?
Our viewpoint is always radical transparency. So if we believe in what we're doing and we believe that it's right and supported by science, we need to be talking about it, even if we think it might make people kind of queasy if they've never seen it before. So the North American Meat Institute, which is the group of all the meat processors, there's an activist group that kept saying if slaughterhouses had glass walls, everyone would go vegan. Meat Institute said, okay, challenge accepted. And they come out with this series of videos called the Glass Walls Project, and they're narrated by Temple Grandin, and they have one for all the different species that's a literal look at slaughter. It says, this is how it goes. This is the whole process from start to finish. Watch it, make of it what you will. So we find most people say, I'll pass. Just knowing that it's out there and they were willing to record it, that's enough for me. So we feel that we have to be transparent, show it all, talk about it all, so people can make up their own minds based on accurate information.
Tim Keller, Mount Horeb, Wisconsin here. We've been doing a lot of tours with the Wisconsin Milk Marketing Board, which is Dairy Farmers of Wisconsin now, of course. But over the years, we've had many groups from the food industry come out to our place. So just a couple stories on this, but one day I was coming out of the freestall barn after I'm IVing a cow with a hot case of toxic mastitis. So I introduced myself as Dr. Tim, and which was a great learning experience for these people because they always come across, non-antibiotic this, that, and the other thing. So I use this as a teaching moment to say, this is what happens when a cow gets sick. This is why we treat this cow, and explain how long the milk has to stay out, or it's always checked before it goes back in. We double check everything at our place, but I use this as a great teaching experience for these folks. Another little story is our local chiropractor that I go to. He won't drink conventional milk because he says it's got antibiotics in it. So we got the perception out there because it says no antibiotics in your milk, then the other milk has got antibiotics in it. This happened with the chicken industry. There's a local restaurant chain that used this in their advertising, no antibiotics and hormones in their chicken. So I called them on it. I said, when you do this, you're implying that everybody else's chicken is full of it. Well, nobody's got it in it. So what happens is it's going to snowball into everything, which it has. Mm-hmm. So how do we counter all this stuff?
Yeah, so in chicken, you see the little asterisk. It says no hormones, and there's a little asterisk, and it says at the bottom, no one has hormones. It's almost like RBST, where if you have the RBST free label, there has to be the little label that says that actually doesn't mean anything. So one of the things that's so important is that companies, and I know you guys more on the producer side, you can have an influence on your processor, on your co-op. We all have to stand together, because as soon as one company goes in the direction of the sphere marketing, more are going to feel like they have to, because exactly like you said, if you put on your label, there's no antibiotics in this, there's no hormones in this, people are going to start thinking, well, why is this the only milk that has that on there? That must mean the others have it. So that's a conversation we've had, especially in poultry, because some of our members that give us money to try to debunk these myths have the big no hormone label on their chicken. And it's because somebody started doing it, everyone got on board, and now we're trying to push back on myths that we're also perpetuating. perpetuating. Speaking of BST, somebody pointed out to me, I didn't know this, but on Fairlife's website, I think it says on their bottle even, we don't use BST, go to this link to see why. And they have this whole page on the website that says we don't use it because of fear, because people push back on a safe and healthy product. The only reason we don't use it is because of all this concern that we don't think is founded, but we don't feel like we can use it because nobody else is, and because of all the fears around the label. I thought that was awesome. And if we could all, as companies, start being that transparent and being honest and upfront about why we're marketing the way we are, it could be helpful a lot. And one more quick anecdote to echo what you said at the beginning of your story. We did a tour for restaurant and retail brands, and we went to a broiler chicken operation, and the chicken operation had recently gone no antibiotics ever. And the food companies were like, oh, that's so great, the farmer, you must love that. And she said, no, I absolutely hate it. It's devastating. My mortality is through the roof. I'm picking up more dead birds. I'm losing money on this, and I'm not going to get as much of a premium back to make up for what I'm losing. So those stories from farmers themselves, I can say this till I'm blue in the face, but you guys as farmers on the ground, your voices are worth 10 of mine. So the more that we can share that and we can amplify that, those stories are really meaningful.
Do we have one more question?
It was following up. Kind of is, so she did it.
Okay, well, I do think Hannah will be here through tomorrow, so please feel free to introduce yourself and ask her any other questions you might have, or learn more about the resources that Animal Agriculture Alliance provides. But with that, I would like to have everyone give a round of applause to Hannah for joining us today. So we have time for a quick break. The next track sessions will start at 11 a.m. and in here we will